It's working. Okay, so we are continuing Avodah Zarah. We got off to a start last week with Avodah Zarah 1, 1, and now we are going to be on Avodah Zarah 1.5. But I want to make sure we have a quick review of when we talk about Avodah Zarah, or when we talk about Ovdei Kochavim, which is the Hebrew for worshippers of the stars. We need to make sure, again, that we review who are we talking about in this category, because we're going to see some very stringent and very, you may consider, offensive treatments of this category. What are we talking about? What is an idolater?
Worships anything else but God.
Worships.
God.
It worships anything, right? So let's make that thing the operative word, right? They have to be worshiping a thing. As we talked about last week, and I'm going to keep repeating this until we're all on the same page, an idolater is not the same as saying non-Jew. Right? We are perfectly fine with there being non-Jew monotheists. We're perfectly fine with there being non-Jews who are confused about what they believe, who are agnostic-ish and such. But as soon as you start bowing down and making offerings to a thing, to an idol, to the sun, to a mountain, that is when we get into trouble. That is the issue for idolatry. Right? If you are worshiping an item, you are an idol worshiper. And that's the category that we're talking about. And we have perhaps less experience in the modern world, because even those that are on the border of what we might consider idolaters have much more sophisticated theologies than the ancient world. And most of them would not consider themselves in essence to be idolaters. We talked about that a lot last week. And most of their core beliefs are non-idolatrous, even if some of the practitioners act in idolatrous ways. Right? And that's a very important distinction. It's not about what does the average person do, it's about what does the faith teach. If the faith teaches worship a thing, yeah, I spelled that right. If the faith teaches worship a thing, then we're in trouble. If the faith teaches you worship God, but people worship a thing instead, then their faith isn't happy with them, we're not happy with them, but that doesn't make the whole faith wrong, right? We got that? You don't define the faith by the lowest common denominator, you define the faith by what the faith aspires to be. And as we talked about last week, there are some people who treat Judaism as though it was an idol-worshiping religion, right? There are people who worship the Torah. They don't care what the Torah says, but they treat the Torah like an idol. They're not bowing to God, they're bowing to the Torah. And that's a problem. And that is not that common, but there are definitely some people who treat the books, the teachings, the rituals as the object, not as the tool to reach God. They treat that as the focus of their faith rather than as the vehicle of their faith. Who does that? I would be willing to wager that if you went into an average congregation and you sat down and asked each person carefully, do you really believe in God? That you would find a small percentage who said, no, not really. But they still bow towards the Torah. They still devote their time towards the objects and the rituals. They're treating that as the end rather than as a means to an end. And that's problematic. For someone to reach out and kiss the Torah, but to not believe that the Torah is our connection to God, is treating the object as the focus of our veneration, of our respect, rather than the object being respected because of its job in connecting us to God. So there are many people who don't make that next line. Now, I'm not saying that's the majority, God forbid, but there are people who, oftentimes this is used, a term that's sometimes used as spiritual materialism, that they are acting in a spiritual way, but they have really turned their spiritualism into another form of materialism. So the same way that some people collect cars, other people will collect spiritual acts of holiness and piety, but they're not doing them to be close to God, they're doing them just to show off, they're doing them because that just feels good, and they lose that important second part. And that happens not only in other religions, but even sometimes in Judaism. As much as we tell people not to, as much as we focus on non-idolatry, as much as we focus on this is the vehicle towards God, people can still sometimes get stuck. So I also believe it's fair that we cut a little slack to other faiths that have traditions that are non-idolatrous, and yet people sometimes act as though they were idolatrous. So we go by what the official line is, not by what the average person is. And certainly not the sub-average person. Good?
Yes.
Good. Because you got to keep that in mind when we remember what the people were like that our ancestors were dealing with during the days of the Mishnah. When we remember that the idols of the Romans and the idols of the other surrounding pagan societies were the vehicles, the excuses that were used for these horribly oppressive, brutal, vicious, bloodthirsty regimes that would torture people regularly and would execute without any form of true justice and really just engage in so many practices that all modern cultures now look down upon. That was standard, and that was done partly, if not primarily, because of the way they could deceive themselves through idolatry. Idolatry was a very important pillar of propping up that type of worldview. But with that in mind, let's see how we now interact or don't interact with people who fall into that category. So we are on Avodah Zarah 1.5, and I need a volunteer.
I could do it, but I might need your help with some of these words.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we got some funky words here.
Yeah. The following things are forbidden to be sold to idolaters: Istrubling,
That's fine.
Benot Shua,
But note, anytime you see a TH in Hebrew, it's going to be just a T sound.
Benot Shua, with their stems, frankincense, and a white rooster.
All right. So the Itzroblim are a type of cedar product, like the little cones that come off of a cedar tree. And the Benot Shua are a type of fig. And the frankincense and the white rooster. What do these things have in common? Right? It's what these were in their days, things that were commonly used or almost primarily used for idol worship. And therefore, if someone walks into your store and says, I would like a white rooster to go and worship Zeus, we tell them, no. Right now, think about that for a second. What's that?
We don't even have time frames, like before.
No, these are not like before festivals, after this is any time someone comes and asks for frankincense, you know they're going to use it to worship an idol. And you're responsible for that. You, the shopkeeper, right? Even though you're not going to worship the idol, right? There's two main problems here. One, you are then benefiting from idolatry, right? If someone gives you $5 to buy the rooster and go sacrifice it, you've got $5 because of their idolatry. You have now directly benefited because of their worship. And that worship is such anathema to us that we cannot benefit even with that level of being removed from what's going on. And two, you are putting a stumbling block before the blind. By providing the apparatus for them to worship in this manner, you are now, everything okay?
Yes.
Okay. By providing the apparatus for them to worship in this manner, you are now making it more likely that they will continue with their idol worship. Right? Remember, the ultimate goal in Judaism, with regards to idolatry, is not the destruction of the idol worshippers. It's the destruction of the idols. Right? Very important difference there. Right? It's not about getting rid of the idolater. It's about getting rid of the idol. We want the idolater to get rid of the idol, him or herself. Right? We want that all the idols will be gone, that everybody will recognize that there is only one God, and even though we have different paths and ways of worshiping God, that it is the same God that we worship, not that stick, that stone, that sun, that star. And so that means if I'm in any way, shape, or form aiding you in you pursuing your idolatry, making it at all any easier for you to do that, I'm helping to keep you stuck in that mode of worship. So when it comes to these items, which are always considered to be idolatrous in the days of the Mishnah, these were standard things. I'm trying to even think of anything in the modern worship. What's something modern that would even fit into the same sort of category?
Incense, probably?
Imagine, here's an idea. Imagine, because incense can be done just for relaxing, but imagine you are in an area where there is a big lake and there is no fishing allowed. Okay? and someone comes to your store and they want to buy bait, worms. Are you allowed to sell them worms?
Yeah. Could be for the garden.
Could be for the garden. All right, so we're going to get into the, are you allowed to sell them a fishing pole? Right? The idea would be if there is too much of an obvious connection between the object they want to buy and a forbidden practice, you're not allowed to give them, you're not allowed to sell them the object. And that was the best I could come up with. Sorry. Not all my analogies work. What? A bomb. Okay, right. So it depends on where you live now, because it could be for medical purposes or recreational in certain states. But right, if someone wants to buy, well, actually here's another thing that actually is a real prohibition. Thank you for that trigger. Can you go into your local pharmacy and buy 500 boxes of cough medicine? No, because people use that to make drugs out of. Right? So if you buy things like that in quantity, they go, no. I know the only reason you're buying this cold medicine in 500 blocks is because you're going to go do something illegal. Nobody has that bad of a cold. Right? So I know you're doing something illegal, therefore I can't sell it to you. You can't say, hey, I just made the deal. I'm just selling the cold medicine. I didn't do anything wrong. If you know that what you're doing is going to be used for an illegal purpose, you can't make that initial sale. And that's what's happening here. These items in their day were considered to be so exclusively used for idolatrous purposes that if an idol worshiper came to you and wanted to buy them, sorry, can't do it. No sale.
It would be safer if they don't even keep it in their store.
But for some of these things, you might be able to sell it to a non-idolater and be used for perfectly reasonable reasons. And that's part of the challenge, is if I know you're going to use it for this forbidden purpose, then I can't. Well, let's get a little bit more down, because as you can already see, well, maybe it's for the garden. Sometimes there's a little wiggle room on this. So
and also, because not every believer is an idolater.
Exactly right.
So you can sell to a non-believer that is not an idolater.
Correct.
And this person sell to the idolater.
But then you're not benefiting directly.
No, but you are breaking the essence, the idea, the kavanah of what you try to do.
One of my favorite midrashim. You gave me the chance to use it. I love this midrash, right? So one of the smart aleck Romans came up to the rabbis and they said, so if your God hates idols so much, how come God doesn't just destroy all the idols? Right? Just, just lightning bolts and destroy all the idols. And the rabbi said, people also worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. Should God destroy those too? And the person said no. And he says, but then the people who worship the sun, the moon, and the stars would say, aha, our gods must be the real gods, because all the idols were destroyed. So unless you want to destroy everything for everyone, something has to remain in the world. Since an idol worshiper could use just about anything at some point to worship an idol, you would have to not sell anything to anyone ever in order to prevent them from possibly misusing it. So what the rabbis, again, are trying to look for here is, what is that balance between hiding in my bomb shelter and trying to stay away from the idol worshippers until they're all gone from the face of the earth, and just selling anything to anybody because what do I care? They want a balance between that. And the line they're drawing is, if it is obviously and only used for idol worship by idol worshippers, then when an idol worshiper comes to buy it, I can't sell it. But if it has purpose outside of idol worship, then when a non-idol worshiper wants to buy it, I can't. And if he turns around and resells it, that's enough of a separation that I can't be concerned about. Now, if I know that he's going to resell it, that's a problem again. And if I know he's my middleman, yes, then yeah, there's an issue. Yeah, you're always looking for a way to get around that. But if I don't know that he's doing that, if I'm just selling wholesale frankincense and he's turning around and selling it to idol worshippers, that's not my problem. But if I know that he's going to be doing that, then now I've got trouble. Okay, so Michelle, keep going.
Rabbi Judah says it is permitted to sell a white rooster to an idolater among other roosters.
Right, so, okay, they often like to pick out white roosters for whatever reason. I don't know the ins and outs of idol worship, but they like their white chickens. But if you sell them a flock of chickens, then you're just selling them chickens. And if one of them happens to be a white rooster, that's not such a big deal, because nobody would buy a whole batch of chickens just to get the white rooster, is the assumption. And if they really do, well, then they're going above and beyond what a rational person might do, and therefore you can't predict that, and therefore you're not responsible for that. There's sort of a minimum level of what's reasonable to be worried about. However,
but if it be by itself, one should clip its spur and then sell it to him, because a defective animal is not sacrificed to an idol.
Right. Do we know what the spurs are on the roosters? Right, on the back of their legs, they have those spiky pieces. Right, so just cut that off, and then you can sell the rooster, because now it's soup.
It's not more kosher.
It doesn't make it more kosher, but now they're not going to sacrifice it, so we're okay. All right. On the other hand,
as for other things, if they are not specified, their sale is permitted, but if it's specified, it is forbidden. All
right, so Rabbi Yehuda wants to put the line lower than the other sages. He wants to say, look, white roosters mixed together, that's okay. Even a white rooster by itself, as long as you make it defective, that's okay. And even frankincense, as long as the guy doesn't say, I'm buying this for my idol, that's okay. If he says, I'm buying it because it smells nice, then you can sell it to him. But notice the majority say, we need the bar a little bit higher than that. Right? Because these are primarily used by idolaters for these practices, we have to just draw the line and say no sale. And then Rabbi Meir throws in a little extra.
Rabbi Meir says also a good hazal and
niklivas
are forbidden to be sold to idolaters.
So apparently these are different types of palm branches, and it would be the equivalent of someone saying, they don't want to sell us a lulav, right? You don't want to sell me an etrog, the big lemon-looking thing for Sukkot. That because they know I'm going to use it for my holiday, they don't want to be part of this. Okay, so how do we handle this? Come on, we live in America, right? Laws of discrimination. Is this... Well, by American standards, this is a problem, right? By American standards, this is definitely a problem. We are saying we are willing to discriminate in our services towards someone based upon their religion.
Not even so. It says selling. A store owner, it says, I want to sell you white chicken.
Right.
Why?
Because you're going to sacrifice it. I know you're going to sacrifice it. But there is a distinction here between some of the other debates in modern American culture, because this is very similar, but I think there is some distinction between people in America who say they don't want to, for example, make a cake for a wedding between same-sex couples, because they believe that goes against their religion. Right? That's a major issue right now in many of the court systems, as it's sort of working out what the law is going to be about that. So the difference I think that we're looking at here is the items that are being prohibited for sale are items that are used directly in the worship of the idols. Right? It's not saying you're not allowed to sell him the hamburger that he's going to eat at the barbecue after his idol worship. You're only not allowed to sell him the chicken that will be offered to the idol for his idol worship.
So in other words, items that will be used.
That will actually be used for the worship. Right? Not you can't sell him a suit because he's going to his idol temple, but you're not allowed to sell him the frankincense that he's going to put on the altar in front of the statue. Now, in American law, I think they would probably still say there's a problem there. But as far as some of the other issues that happen currently in American law does say that you are allowed not to participate in the religion of someone else if you disagree with it. So, for example, if someone came to me and said, Rabbi, we would like to get married by you. We're not Jewish. We worship this big rock, and we'd like you to do the ceremony in front of the rock. I can tell you right now, the American government would be on my side when I said no. And so too, if someone said that their religion did not allow them to marry same-sex couples. What's that? The Pledge of Allegiance, exactly. We have people who will, by their religion, will not take a Pledge of Allegiance, and the government permits that. So the government, at least in America, does not seem willing to force people to participate in the rituals or support the ritual directly of another religion that they disagree with. But the secondary level, yeah, where we would really get into trouble is, I'm not selling to you because it's 3 days before your holiday that we talked about last week. That would be the bigger issue as far as American law goes. Not selling you the rooster you're going to sacrifice, I think we could get away with that. But not selling you anything for 3 days right before your big holiday, that would probably be a bigger problem in American law. It would be easier just to shut your store around the holiday. But we are in the Middle East and we are in the ancient world, and we're dealing with people that are, like I said, there's a big difference between idolaters and non-Jews. We are dealing with real idolaters here, not just people who happen to be of a different religion.
Yeah, but if I already know whatever they sacrifice, I already know that the 3 days before the festival, I cannot sell anything to them.
Right.
I just hide all the thing they're gonna
hide all your chickens. Yes.
When they come, I don't have nothing.
And again, within American law, as long as you were not having a chicken for your Jewish friends but no chickens for him, I think you can get away with that. If you just, I'm not selling chickens for a week. You just can't discriminate. Exactly. You can't say yes you but no you because of your religion. I think that's how it would work out, but it would be an interesting thing to go through the American court system, were that to come up. And I don't know of any cases where it has yet. All right, let's move on to 1:6. Half an hour on one Mishnah. That's good.
In a place where it is the custom to sell small domesticated animals to
goats,
non-Jews,
sheep, that kind of thing.
Such sale is permitted, but where the custom is not to sell, such sale is not permitted.
Okay, you didn't notice, but we just changed topics. Right? It's one of the great examples of the Mishnah where it's talking idol worship, Shabbat. Idol worship, and we're going to get back to idol worship in the next Mishnah. So what's happening here is we have an obligation that we are not allowed to work our animals on Shabbat. Are you allowed to sell an animal that is a non-Shabbat animal to somebody who will use the animal on Shabbat? That's the question. Right, because now this animal is going to have to work on Shabbat. And the animal is used to not working on Shabbat. Is it fair to make the animal go down in that level? And the answer is, for small animals, goats, sheep, animals that you don't work. Right? No one ever put a sheep in a cart and said, here, pull my wagon. And no one ever attached a plow to a goat and said, let's plow the field. For those types of animals, yes. If the local area, the custom is, sure, no problem, then you can sell them. If the local custom is don't sell them, then don't sell them. Just follow the local custom. Make sense? Okay. Did Penelope ever come and get the kids?
Yeah.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see. Okay.
Yeah, 15 minutes ago.
Oh, it was 7:15. Okay. I just looked up at the clock and I got worried. What? The red car. Yeah, okay. This is the first week we've done that, so I'm trying to make sure that it all went. All right. However,
in no place, however, is it permitted to sell large animals, cows or goats, whether whole or
maimed, right? Like injured. So big working animals, well, no one buys a cow for a pet. Right? No one buys a cow just to keep it in the house and be friends with it. You buy a cow to make it work. You buy a horse to make it work. You buy a donkey to make it work. And therefore, you're not allowed to sell them. Because you know they're gonna work them on Shabbat. And so, sorry, I can't sell that to you. However, there's a bit of a debate.
Rabbi Judah permits it in the case of a maimed one.
Right? If it's maimed, they're probably not going to work it, is his thinking. Right? If the animal is limping, then no one's going to put that in their wagon, use it for their wagon. They're probably just going to eat the animal, and that's fine. They're allowed to do that. But working it, not so much. On the other hand, Ben Betera.
And Ben Betera permits it in the case of a horse.
So this goes down to a topic on Shabbat law, which we're not really going to go into. But according to the rabbi's understanding of work on Shabbat, riding a horse in and of itself doesn't count as work. It is forbidden for Jews to ride horses because you might break off a branch to swat the horse to make it go. So even though we don't ride horses, a horse could be ridden by someone else. So it's a little confusing there. We're not going to go too much down that because then we have to go study Shabbat in more detail and one Mishnah at a time. But the idea is, in addition to some of the restrictions on selling because of idol worship, there's also some restrictions on selling because of Shabbat. And now we're going to get back to, as long as we're talking about idol worshipers, there's other stuff we don't sell them, even if it has nothing to do with the idols. Mishnah 7, thank you, yes.
One should not sell them bears, lions, or anything which may injure the public.
Right? You don't give them dangerous animals. Because what are they going to do with lions and bears?
Feed the Jews.
Exactly. Right? Who do you think ends up in the Colosseum? Right? It may not be you, but it could be some other poor Jewish guy, or even if it's not a Jewish guy, some other innocent person who's being forced to fight a bear for sport, right? Or even if it's just bear attacking bear or bear baiting. That's Tsar Ba'alei Chayim, that's causing suffering to an animal. Right? You're not allowed to do that. A modern interpretation of this would be, if you are, if someone comes up to you and says, with a big T-shirt that says, I hate America, and they want to buy 40 pounds of explosives from you, you don't sell them explosives, right? People who are clearly not going to value the community and the life of the community, you don't give them something dangerous because it's just not a good idea.
But you were allowed to have bears and lions?
With restrictions. We talked about them when we were doing Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, when we were talking about the rules of if you owned a dangerous animal, what your liability was.
Oh,
right. So you kind of could own these things, not like in your apartment, but under certain restrictions and making sure that there was safety, you could possibly own them. But giving them to someone who may not have that same restriction and that same idea, or indeed wants to use them for dangerous reasons, then no, you can't sell them. And again, remember, we're talking about people that are likely to do these dangerous things. So in the modern world, if a zoo wanted to buy your lion, that's not the same as the problem we're talking about here. So you don't have to say, is it a Jewish zoo? That's okay, part 2.
One should not join them in building a basilica, a scaffold, a stadium, or a platform.
All right, so these things were used for their sort of judicial or public actions that we did not really approve of. So the basilica was considered to be like their courthouse. The scaffold, I think a better English translation would be gallows. This is the place they would hang people, right? And the stadium, of course, was used for very cruel sport. And the platform was where they would go and they would teach their laws, which were not really just. So you can't help them build those things. Right? If they ask you, will you help me build my stadium? We say, no, I'm not going to.
But yes, we are allowed to help them to build gym and spa.
Well, the spa we're going to get to in just the next line.
Because that was the problem with the
idol.
statue.
Yeah, with Gamliel, yes. We're gonna
when you do peel, if you do the idol or not.
Yes.
Story, yeah.
So we're going to get there eventually, but for building a house, building their shops, building a farm, you're allowed to help them. Well, farm we're going to get to actually probably tonight, but we were allowed to help them build other things. But these particular things, no, you could not work to build.
Also bath houses, yes.
Well, we're going to get there in a second. Right, part 3.
But one may join them in building public or private bathhouses.
And so, but you can build a bath. Remember, people did not have a bath usually in their house. I mean, if you were very rich, you'd have a private bath, but most people, there was a public bath. And by bath, I don't mean bathroom. I mean a place to actually bathe. You know, think Roman baths with hot water, cold water, and all of that stuff, like swimming pool type baths. Right? Going to the bathroom was much less pleasant. But these soaking baths were very important in the Roman world. And you could build them. These were considered good for the community. And the Jews liked them, and so did the non-Jews. But
however, he reaches the cupola,
mm-hmm.
in which the idol is placed, he must not build.
Right. In most of these bathhouses, you know, you would have sort of the main ground floor, and you might have your water tanks here, and over the top there would usually be a little alcove, you know, in the top, and that was where you would put the idol. So building that, no, you're not allowed to build the place they're going to put the idol. Building the water, building the walls, building the roof, sure, but you're not allowed to build the idol spot. So this is, again, that line between doing absolutely nothing and just doing everything. It's, you know, baths are not bad. They're not so terrible. We think they're a good thing for the community to have. But we know they put idols in them because they always stick an idol in these things, right? It's just what they do. They stick idols everywhere. I could say I'm not going to help them build any building that's going to ever have an idol in it ever. Or I could say I'll build everything, including where the idol goes. I'll build the whole bath. I just won't build that. Right? That's the compromise position. And it's, you know, very interesting, I think, to see where the rabbis agree to settle.
And what happens if Rome forced them to build it?
Oh, if there is onus, right? What we call, if someone is compelling you to build, right? So you're a slave, and there's a guy over there with a big whip saying, I want you to build where the idol goes. You build where the idol goes. Right? If the person says, I want you to put the idol there, you put the idol there. If the person says, I want you to worship the idol, that's where we get into trouble. Right? That's where we get into trouble. And that's a much more complicated topic. But the other parts, if you're a slave, yeah, you're not given a trouble.
It could be someone, but they say, okay, all these things we're putting go there,
yeah,
and force all of the to work.
Right. They don't need to make you a permanent slave. Sometimes they would just say, all right, everybody, the emperor has demanded we build this statue or we build this plaza. Everyone do it. And you would generally have to do it. Yeah. And then when you were done, you could go home. All right, 1-8.
One should not make jewelry for an idol, such as necklaces, earrings, or finger rings.
And go ahead and read part A, because there's a little bit of a question about this line.
Rabbi Eliezer says for payment it is permitted.
All right, so this line is confusing, and I'm interested to see in your copy of the Mishnah. Do they have that line, the Rabbi Eliezer for payment is permitted? Mm-hmm. Because apparently there are certain girsaot, there are versions of this text that don't have that line.
No, because also in Hebrew say Rabbi Eliezer Omer the Sahar Mutar.
Well, yeah, I know, but there are some copies of the Mishnah that don't have that line.
Not in Hebrew.
Not in any language, right? In the manuscripts, right? In some of the handwritten versions, that line doesn't exist because it's confusing. It doesn't make sense. And you know, I'm not an expert, but I can understand why it's a problem, right? Making jewelry for an idol, I think we can all see that even if you're not making the statue, making the necklace that they're going to hang on the statue, that's a problem, right? You're beautifying their statues. So why would we prohibit that? Because it looks like you're helping the idol. But if you pay me, that's okay. But that's even worse, right? I'm helping and I'm benefiting from it. So that phrase of Rabbi Eliezer, I do feel that the other manuscripts are.
It's interesting because I thought exactly different. When I read the sentence, I thought that I owe you, so I create the ornament in order to pay you the debt. So I debt to the Roman, let's say, okay?
Right.
So instead, in order to pay him, I say, okay, here's the ornament, I clean my debt.
That's an interesting read, right? That's an interesting way to interpret it. And I could see that possibly working, but even then, you're benefiting from something for the idol. Now, it's another level. Right, I'm not getting paid for my work. I'm simply clearing a debt. That is a different level. That could work, but it is an interesting line. But the basic idea stands nonetheless that we don't make the adornments for the idol. All right, part 2.
One should not sell to idolaters a thing which is attached to the soil, but when cut down, it may be sold.
All right, so we're talking like a tree. Now, the reason for not selling them a tree is because if you sell them the tree, even if you don't sell them the land, they now have a claim to that parcel that the tree is on, right? If I sell you a tree in my backyard, he can now make demands about what I do with my backyard because he owns the tree. He doesn't own the dirt, but he owns the tree. And that means that he has some foothold, some toehold, some fingerhold in my property. And when we're talking about the land of Israel, allowing an idolater to have that hold is a problem, right? That's the one place on earth that we're not supposed to have idolatry. I mean, we don't want idolatry anywhere, but that's the one spot that we're responsible for. And so giving him the permission to own this tree is a problem.
So what do you do with real estate, with the houses in the city?
We're getting there. You're always just like 2 lines ahead.
Rabbi Judah says one may sell it on condition that it be cut down.
So you can give he gives you a little bit of flexibility. He says, all right, I'll sell you the tree to chop down. Not to keep, but if you want to buy the tree while it's standing, in order to cut it down and use the wood, then that's okay. Obviously, again, you wouldn't be using the wood to build an idol, or at least the guy better not tell you that's what he's doing with it. But if he just wants the wood, we can work with that. However, now let's get to houses and stuff.
One should not let houses to them in the land of Israel, and it is not necessary to mention fields.
All right, so we're not even allowed to lease a house to someone, which would mean all the more so you cannot sell them a house, right? And a field, even more, you should realize that you're not allowed to let them have that. And they're going to go on and try and explain this a bit.
Mm-hmm. In Syria, houses may be let to them, but not fields.
Right. So Syria here, we're talking about the area just to the north of Israel and along the like the Golan area and that area. That was considered to be part of Syria. It wasn't officially Israel. It wasn't within the traditional borders of Israel, but it was still very commonly Jewish lived in and owned, like controlled.
The 2 tribes.
Well, even, this is in the days of the Mishnah, I mean, obviously, yes, during the tribal times, but that territory wasn't still officially part of Israel, and the laws of Israel didn't apply there equally. Otherwise, Moses would have been in Israel, right? Because if on that side of the Jordan was still Israel because the tribes were taking it, then hey, he made it. He just made the border bigger, and now I'm in. It's a nice trick, but it doesn't officially apply there, right? So even so, they have applied, because it's been such a part of Jewish life, they don't want to let go of that to idolaters. To other non-Jews who are monotheists, yes, we can work that out. But to an idolater, no. However, outside completely the land of Israel.
Outside of the land of Israel, houses may be sold and fields let to them. These are the words of Rabbi Meir.
All right, so Rabbi Meir wants to keep this still. I'll sell you a house, but I won't sell you a field. Right? He wants to keep that limit. Why should we let them have this land anywhere in the world? However, Rabbi Yossi has a different interpretation.
Rabbi Yossi says, in the land of Israel, one may let to them houses, but not fields.
Right? Yeah, so he is more lenient. He's saying, yes, I can rent you my house, but I can't rent you my field. Right? Remember, Rabbi Meir said, not the house and not the field. Right? And then move to the next level.
In Syria, we may sell them houses and let fields.
Right? Which is, again, 1 degree more lenient than what Rabbi Meir said. Right? Rabbi Meir said, you can let the house, but not the field. And now Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, you can sell the house and lease the field. And then, of course, outside of Israel completely.
And outside of the land of Israel, both may be sold.
Right? It's fair game everywhere you go. Yes?
You said This only applies to idolaters, not to non-Jews who are monotheists.
Right.
Who are they?
Well, in general Jewish law, there are non-Jews who are monotheists that are not officially attached with any particular religion. Oftentimes they get called by Noahides, meaning they are people who follow the 7 Noahide laws, which are the laws that Judaism believes are applicable to everyone in the world, monotheism being one of them. And they are not necessarily part of a group, but they would be somebody that would be into that category. So someone comes and says, I reject idolatry, I believe there is only one God of the world, and I have the system of justice, and I'm bound to that. That's fine, right? We don't ask them to do anything more. They don't have to convert, they don't have to keep kosher, they don't have to do all these other things. But there are also some religions that have grown up since the time of the Mishnah that scholars have also debated their status. So most authorities agree that, again, by the theology of the religion, that Islam is a monotheistic faith. There is a more mixed debate when it comes to Christianity. I would say that probably the majority come down to the side that Christianity is a monotheistic faith with some practices that we disagree with, and some theological interpretation of God as this Trinity thing that just doesn't make any sense to us. It's a mystery, as I believe they call it. But most still believe that most scholars still believe that they are monotheistic, that they are not trying to be polytheistic.
So before Christianity and Islam,
right?
So these non-Jews, they were not organized. There was no competing monotheistic religion.
Not officially. I mean, there were some faiths that were close, like Zoroastrianism, which was a dualism. So it had a god of light and a god of dark. But that whole second half was a bit of a problem for us, even though they only worshipped one side. The fact that they sort of believed there was this other god, we had difficulties with. But there were not organized monotheistic faiths in the ancient world before Christianity, which came out of Judaism, and then before Islam, which was in many ways influenced by Judaism. So, you know, we've helped at least the underpinnings of monotheism now reach billions of people, thanks to our offspring. All right, Avodah Zarah 1:9. 1:9.
Even in such a place where the laying of a house has been permitted, they did not say that this was permitted if it was, for the purpose of a residence. Since the idolater will bring idols into it, for it says, "You shall not bring an abomination into your house." Deuteronomy 7:26.
Right. So you can lease a house to an idolater, but he can't live in it. Well, because if he lives in it, he's going to bring his idols.
Yeah.
Right?
That would make sense. Well, why would you do that?
Oh, and they might lease it to
Unless they
someone
use it
else.
for
They might use it for work. They
Yeah.
might use it as a warehouse. You know, there are other things to do with the building. Right? Again, it's hard for us to sometimes conceptualize, but a house in the ancient world wasn't like, you know, a house in the neighborhood. A house in the ancient world was also where you did your work. It was also where you stored your stuff. It was not just a place of residence. Nobody had a building that was only for living in. What a waste of space. Right? And besides, what are you going to fill it up with? How much stuff do you own, really? So a place where you lived was also a place where you worked, which was also a place where you did other activities. So there's other things that a person could do rather than just, you know, make it their primary residence. They needed buildings, and they didn't have zoning laws of, you know, residential area versus non-residential, except for certain dangerous or offensive professions. You didn't want to have the guy who was doing leather in your neighborhood. That was not the person you wanted nearby. The smell was. And the same thing for dyers, for doing cloth. You did not want that anywhere near anywhere people lived. Okay, and then part 2 is a continuation of that idea.
In no place may one let a bathhouse to an idolater, as it is called by the name of the owner.
Right, so if I lease the bathhouse to you, the idolater, you're going to be sticking your idol in it, and everyone is still going to call it, you know, Rabbi Neely's bathhouse. It's just, that's what happens, right? It's not the idol worshiper's bathhouse that he rented from Rabbi Neely. It's Rabbi Neely's bathhouse that the idol worshiper is using. And that's not right. That's a problem. That's a problem. All right, so that's the end of the first chapter. Yeah, and I think we can just do 2:1. We'll see how well this stirs up controversy. All right, so if you think the way we've been dealing with idol worshippers has been just a little intolerant up to this point, you ain't seen nothing yet. Question?
No, I said, I don't do no business with youth.
All right, so you might think just don't do any business with anybody, right? Go into your bomb shelter, close the door, right? But
It's true, there was a lot of idolaters at the time, so you had to.
well, most of the world were idolaters. I mean, there was a huge Jewish population, something that we often forget during this time period of the Mishnah. There was a very large Jewish population, especially before the destruction of the Second Temple. But we were still a minority. And even in the land of Israel, although we were the majority, there were still a lot of idolaters living there. Because we were under Roman occupation, there was very little we could do about it directly, which meant we had to interact with them. It wasn't an option to go hide in a bunker. And therefore, knowing what the limits of those interactions was very important for people.
So we're talking about the laws of selling and buying products from idolaters outside of Israel, because it's clear here about properties, okay, that houses field.
Right.
But what happened, for example, like, as we say, the 3 days that you cannot before the holidays sell anything.
Oh,
the same idea applied also for outside of Israel.
If you lived in Rome and it was right before the Saturnalia in December, sorry, no business, right? Or if you were in Rome right before their big festival and the stores were all decorated for their festival, you didn't get to go buy from them. That this wasn't an option.
That's very popular.
Oh, because we were so popular before that.
That's what the problem was.
Yeah, that was the problem. We weren't good customers.
No, it's not like that, because we're supposed to adapt or follow the law of the place.
When in Rome, do as the Romans?
Yes. No, that is the Mishnah. That we are when you need to apply and to follow the law of the place.
Dina de Malchuta, right? The law of the land, the law of the government is the law, except when it violates Torah. Right? If the law of the land says you have to murder someone every Thursday, we don't murder.
Yeah, but in this case, that you are not like in a place full of idolaters.
Yes.
Okay? The law says, well, you need to sell the product and keep your shopping, your job open. Well, will you close it and go against the law of the place?
Well, yes, but I don't think there ever was a law like that. The modern idea that you are not allowed to discriminate by stopping your business is a very modern idea. In the ancient world, if you wanted to stop your business, fine. We just won't buy from you, and we'll probably come back and burn your building. But but the law itself wouldn't tell you that you had to sell. Right? The law would simply say they're not going to protect you if the mob wants to do something. And so that means we're not breaking Torah by going against the law of the land. Simply going to suffer the consequences at the hands of the mob of the idolaters. Reminder of why we don't want to support idolaters. Right? If it's a country where people would murder you because you refuse to help them make a sacrifice, then that's probably a good reason not to help them make the sacrifice.
Correct. So if it's so sensible the issue, why still so many Jews went to live in places where were full of idolaters?
Sometimes it wasn't a choice. Sometimes we were abducted and taken. Sometimes it was because living in the land of Israel was becoming more and more difficult because of the Roman oppression. And that was what pushed so many of our people out. And sometimes it was they would move to a place where the idolatry wasn't so bad or the people were quite reasonable, and then the regime would change or the local attitudes would change. And then we would have to stay for a while and hope it got better or leave. And that became the pattern over the next 2,000 years. That was why, when, for example, the massacres of the Crusades happened, we thought we had worked out a deal, that everything was sort of, they didn't love us, but they didn't hate us, and we could live in this part of Europe. And then the Crusades happened, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, why? I thought we were not friends, but at least we were cordial. But we didn't run away from Europe immediately because we were hoping things would get better. And they did kind of get better right after the Crusades. And then they also kind of got worse. But it was that on again, off again that made it very hard for us to know how to deal with the situation. It was never possible to easily predict because it's so hard to just pick up your family and move to a new country. It's not easy now, and it wasn't easy back then either. So if you thought you could just wait it out, maybe things will get better. It's not really so bad. So the king wants an extra tax just from us. So every now and then they come through and torch the village. People rationalized to live with it. But yeah, that's why we should appreciate where we live now and what the modern world is so much more, because we don't have that same choice to make. We don't have people who are burning our villages, or at least we better not. Yeah. And that's why it's our responsibility to protect it. Right? We know what we have now, and we know that thanks to the American system and most Western democracies, we have the ability to influence and participate in the government to make sure it doesn't go back to the way it used to be. Right? We can't just sit back and say, well, whatever the Goyim do, they'll do. We're not allowed to say that anymore. If you lived in medieval France, that was pretty much all you could say. But living in 21st century Western Europe or America, we have an obligation, and therefore we have a right and therefore an obligation to make a difference. All right, now let's say things that are going to be really controversial.
One should not place animals in inns of non-Jews because they are suspected of bestiality.
Right, if you leave your animal there, someone's going to sleep with it.
I would never take my cow to Motel 6.
People, there are many pet-friendly hotels now. And what this is saying is that if you live in a society where that kind of thing is widely suspected and practiced, which it was not unusual, especially in the ancient Roman world, we have numerous historical examples of such things happening. Maybe not so widespread that you would imagine everyone was doing it, but it was certainly not unheard of at all within the Roman world. I understand why the rabbis felt, you know what, the things I've heard about these Romans, I'm just going to keep the sheep at home. What? Caligula is the most famous example, yes, but not even just him. And then?
A woman should not be alone with them because they are suspected of licentiousness.
Right, if you leave a woman alone with these idolaters, you know what they're like. They're going to be all over her, right? That's just wrong. And similarly,
nor should a man be alone with them because they are suspected of shedding blood.
Right? It's where the two of us are traveling together, and there's this group of idolaters, and it's just you and me, Shlomo. We got to stick together, because if I go off into that part of the town and I say I'll meet you later, I may never meet you again, because they'll kill you and take your money. And who's gonna defend you? Right? Where are you going to get justice from? Are they afraid that the courts are going to punish them for killing some Jew? Right? That was not usually a protection we could count on. And so that was, again, not saying this is how we should look at modern non-Jews. This is saying this is how, because of experiences, we were forced to look at the idolaters of the ancient world. And our history bears out that too often these sorts of things did happen to us. Onward.
A Jewish woman should not act as midwife to a non-Jewish woman because she will be delivering a child for idolatry.
All right, this is where it's harder. Right, so a Jewish midwife is called because the idolatrous woman has gone into labor. Right, she's going to give birth to a baby. The Jewish midwife in the days of the Mishnah would have had to have said no. Because if I help that child be born, I know I'm helping an idol worshiper be brought into the world. Imagine the level of suffering, of pain and oppression that you would have to live in to believe that that was something that you needed to do, that was one blow you could strike to try and stop idolatry from consuming the world and destroying you and your people. How many of your people would have had to have been carried off in slavery? How many of your friends would have had to have been raped and murdered? How much of your land would have had to have been stolen for you to look at every idol worshiper and say, we don't need another one?
That's very interesting. The other side, like we continue after that,
Mhm.
sort of asleep. Okay, because they didn't trust all the idolaters in the previous one, but suddenly to be a seat and childbirth, yes, you trust them.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. And I should point out the
There's a
Talmud,
contradiction here.
kind of. The Talmud does say that you are allowed to be a midwife if you're paid for the job. You're just not allowed to volunteer for the job. Right? So there is that level of it. But let's get to part B here of section 3, or part A of section 3.
But a non-Jewish woman may act as a midwife to a Jewish woman.
Right. So why?
It's no contradiction.
Of course not.
You didn't trust them previously to walking, to leave a woman there, an animal, and something
Right.
to bring kids. You don't know if they will kill the baby, they will throw, or they will say, oh, it's an accident.
But what I do know is that without a midwife, if there is no other midwife available, that there's a very good chance the mother and the baby will die. Right. So this is a medical
So that's it,
explanation.
under extreme circumstances.
Childbirth is extreme. I don't know if you ladies know that, but childbirth is dangerous. And especially if you don't have a midwife, it's very, very dangerous. Remember, there are no hospitals here. No anesthetic, no x-ray machines, no sonograms. I mean, it's just you and the baby and a lot of pain. And the midwife was there to help know what to do to help make that process work. Right? The wisdom of midwives was invaluable in making sure that you had more safe births, both for the baby and the mother. And so if a Jewish woman goes into labor and there's no other midwife except the non-Jewish one, even an idolatrous one, then yeah, you allow her to come and help the baby be delivered. Because without it, the mother and baby are probably dead.
Yeah, but think if you are living in the village, okay, I'm a non-Jew.
Don't think Middle Age, think Romans, okay?
Okay, I'm a Roman. Okay, I know a neighbor that died because the what's the name of this?
The Jewish midwife wouldn't come.
The Jewish midwife didn't come. Why should I allow and permit my wife to help you?
You might not. Yes, you're right, and that might be.
But this Mishnah, this part 2, what makes is breaking the society to make a jungle. Like no one trusts each other. It's all by yourself, and you don't have any cooperation or minimum solidarity.
But
destroying all the social net.
Not in this particular section, but in another part of Mishnah, it says that we visit the sick of the non-Jews together with the Jews, that we bury the dead of the non-Jews as well as the Jews, that we take care of the poor of the non-Jews as well as the Jews. And it says, Mipnei darchei shalom, because this is the path of peace. So here, when we're talking about, am I willing, for free, to go and help bring an idol worshiper into life, given what they have done to us, given what they do to the world, the answer should be no. But if somebody is sick, you can take them chicken soup. If somebody is poor, you can feed them and clothe them. If somebody's dead on the side of the road, you don't walk past their body, you bury it. So you're right. This is definitely creating a separation between us and idolaters, which is kind of the point. The rabbis did not want us to be too friendly with idol worshippers. Right? Non-Jews who are monotheists, sure, no problem. Idol worshippers, you don't get chummy. Because that A, it's dangerous, but B, it's also leading you towards idolatry. But having some relations was essential. We needed to have some relations. And how to moderate that, that's what this mission is all about. And so they're saying, no, you should not volunteer to help make more idol worshippers into the world. And on the other hand, you should not avoid medical help when you are in an emergency just because the person's an idol worshiper. And if that creates a tension in the community between you and idol worshippers, Okay, that's going to happen. But this is telling you whether you're allowed or not allowed. All right, let's get part 4, and then we'll call it a night.
A Jewish woman should not suckle the child of a non-Jewish woman.
Same reason.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But a non-Jewish woman may suckle the child of a Jewish woman in her premises.
All right, so if she's there with the baby and I'm there with her, then she can nurse the baby. You need to save the life of the child. If the mother can't feed the child, then you need a wet nurse to feed the child. But because we're worried about what they might do to the baby, it's only when they're in my house. Right? I don't let them take the baby home and come back tomorrow, because God knows what they might do. And unfortunately, we've got too good of a historical record of knowing the things that idolaters do. And so that level of suspicion, it's not about being paranoid when they've really done horrible things to you and they keep trying to do more horrible things. That's not paranoia, that's being careful. And it's very important, however, to keep reminding ourselves that that it becomes paranoia when the majority of the people you're around no longer behave like the idolaters of the past. Right? If most of your neighbors are good people, are kind people, non-idolaters, and have shown themselves to be reliable, trustworthy friends, by all means treat them as reliable, trustworthy friends. But if they are brutal, ancient idolaters, not that I think there are so many of them are hanging around Orlando, then yeah, be careful. Right? This is not what you want to get mixed up in.
This is more than being careful. I mean, when we talk about punishments, we always say the sins of the fathers aren't put onto the child. In this case, we're committing the child to death.
We are not, and it's an important distinction. We are not commanded to go out into other countries and kill idolaters. We are not commanded to pull down their buildings on them. We're not supposed to, go kill their children. But to actively participate in propagating them for no reason, that is a hard place in Judaism to stand.
For no reason?
Well, I know
the life of an innocent child.
That's again going back into the depths of what were our people experiencing at that time. Right? Let me put it in terms, even though it's a little bit of Godwin's law. Let me put it in terms that the modern might understand. Right? 1941, you are given an option to save Hitler's child. Right? Let's imagine, that Eva Braun had a baby, and he is proclaiming this child will be the Fuhrer after me, and he will finish my glorious work. No, not dead. And you have a choice of helping to bring the child into the world, or simply not. Right? No one's asking you to murder the child. Just, are you willing to participate in the planned continuation of a regime that you know is determined to extinguish you? And that was what our people really felt that they were facing. And the history does kind of bear it out, that time and time again, the idol worshippers of those generations were horribly brutal to our people, and not just the leadership, but the common people as well. So as distasteful as it is, because most of the non-Jews we know are nothing like the people of the ancient world, and we need to remember that. We also need to remember that the ancient world idolaters were nothing like the modern people we know. This is not about would you help, to rescue the baby of your neighbor. This is, would you help to rescue the baby of a Nazi? I mean, and even Nazi may not be strong enough, because many people join the Nazi party for political reasons and didn't necessarily believe in the ideology. This is people who truly were debasing themselves and their culture to this form of worship that was perpetuating all that we consider to be dark and evil in the world, and creating vast, millennia of human suffering. And with that in mind, it's somewhat more understandable of why our ancestors held the positions that they did. But it's also a relief that we do not have to treat the people around us as they did theirs. Yeah, thank God. And thank the good people, both Jewish and non-Jewish, who have seen that the way that idolaters used to behave and live was not a good way for this world, and have been changing for the last 2,000 years. So we need to look at this only as a historically painful period, rather than as modern advice for what to do with your neighbors.